points here. One is that I don't think the Chinese allow you to buy the freehold. So that's a lesson we can perhaps learn. And the second thing is I was talking to a lawyer who'd been in the Middle East for years, and he said there is an interest in securing food lines for nations that don't produce enough food themselves, but that they will comply with whatever rules we have. So we don't need to say, oh, they'll get upset if we don't allow them to buy farms in New Zealand. They'll accept the rules and they'll come into other arrangements to secure their food lines. But I think Fonterra investing in China is probably to secure right through that there is New Zealand control over the product and there's no risk of contamination.
Particularly after the Sanlu scandal. Right. Well, moving on, the Land and Water Forum, its report was presented to Parliament last week, and it appears it's championing a collaborative approach. How do you think this will work, Bruce?
Well, I think that's going to be a very interesting approach, because when you look around the world and look in Australia and other places, there are huge problems in arriving at solutions that suit all the major players, including the public. But I think I have in the back of my mind that until you put a price on water, the use of water, then you won't get the use, maximum use from it, the most efficient use from it. But having said that, you still need to secure basic water supplies for the population.
What do you think, Catriona? The idea of a price on water, that's quite scary to some people, isn't it?
Well, it is to me, that's for sure. But, I mean, this is going to be just an increasingly crucial issue. And, I mean, we're pretty lucky in New Zealand with the water that we have. But globally, it's just going to be a huge problem in the future. And we haven't even really started to deal with it properly. Now,
Catriona, moving on to suggestions by Labour that GST should be removed on fruit and veggies. It would certainly perhaps increase people's intake up to 5+ a day or more, but is it just a pipe dream?
I mean, it's a tiny point, but I think it's a start. I practice law in South Auckland with, you know, obviously some of the poorer people in New Zealand I represent, and I can recall really heartbreaking seeing the supermarket tally for one of my clients, and she's got 6 children, and on her shopping receipt was 20 cans of 99-cent spaghetti. So, you know, I just wonder how much fresh fruit and vegetables is she ever able to afford to buy for her family. So I think anything that you can do to improve that. And, you know, obviously, as we know, it's much better to keep people healthy rather than pay tens of thousands for when they end up in hospital
into
later
the health
on.
Budget, yes.
But as you say, it's only a tiny point, and really what would help more is if we had decent wages in New Zealand and decent benefit levels.
So people would be able to afford to buy the food that was good for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, another story, this also from the Christchurch Press, reporting a mushroom growing business relocating from Morrinsville down to Canterbury with the loss of 160 jobs in the North Island, hopefully those coming again in Canterbury. But the owners of the business, they were blaming their relocation on objections that local residents had taken to their business with smells and so forth. Is the Resource Management Act getting an unfair cop in this instance?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't followed the history of this, but there have been complaints over a long period, and maybe the location in the first place was not the best selection, and maybe now they've found somewhere where they can go where they're not going to attract the complaints and difficulties that they've had at Morrinsville.
Because there certainly are communities that are more keen to attract agricultural or processing enterprises to their economies, aren't there, Catriona?
So, yes, and I mean, I think actually the Resource Management Act gets a very unfair level of criticism because it's in the media often, but it only ever seems to be the complaints. And I think we need to remember that, you know, it is protecting New Zealand for everyone. And look at the unchecked development and the huge environmental problems there are in countries overseas that don't have that protection. And I think we should actually be grateful and just remember more how much, you know, that it's giving us clean waterways and our clean green image, which is crucial.
Right, okay. Well, Well, moving on, Alan Bollard, he's given a rather gloomy outlook for the economy recently. Do you agree with him, Bruce, or you're a bit more optimistic?
Well, I think he gives a very balanced view. We get a lot of our information from bank economists who are chosen by the media because they're available and whose banks are playing the markets. But to have somebody standing back and looking at it, and his book, I think, of Crisis is an example of that dispassionate but concerned look at New Zealand is what we want, not also politicians playing it up or playing it down according to whether they're in government or opposition. So I think he does a good job.
What's your view, Catriona?
I'm very concerned about the outlook for jobs. I think we saw statistics in March that were surprisingly optimistic about the jobless rate, but I think we've got quite a lot of reason to be concerned now, and I think actually there's going to be more job losses before it starts getting better. So that's very concerning because the retail sector seems to be continuing to be far more depressed than anyone had thought. And
yes, that's right.
I think these bank economists have been caught out by that. I think they thought that there was a turn and things were starting to improve, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case.
So the governor may be right. After the break, you beauty, a bouquet or a bollocking? Who gets what? Find out shortly when we come back. Now it's on to you beauty, praise or a bollocking, the opposite. I believe you have the opposite, Bruce.
I have a bollocking because I think the government have taken, in the passion of the moment, far too many powers under the legislation they rushed through Parliament in one day to cope with the Canterbury earthquake. I think it would be very wise in a couple of months to have a look at that and then say, well, we're finding we're not really needing all of it. We'll have these bits that we need to keep. It's just a bad principle to take powers to enable ministers to do things, and the courts can't touch them. There's no judicial review. They've got impunity.
Do you think it was all just heat of the moment? They had to be seen to be doing
enthusiasm,
something?
and look, governments rather like being able to do things without having to worry about the niceties. And I think they had legitimate concerns about rebuilding and maybe permits and all that sort of thing would hold things up. I think they need to show us that they need to keep it, because they started off, I think, wanting the powers to 2014.
Which is a very long time.
They pulled it back to 2012.
But you still believe that's too long?
But I think that's too long. It ought to be reviewed long before that.
Right. What do you think, Catriona? An early review is a good idea?
No, I quite agree with Bruce. It's obviously very difficult for anyone to speak out against this at the moment, and good on the Greens that they did. You know, people are sort of accused of being unpatriotic and standing in the way of getting Christchurch rebuilt, which is obviously what everyone wants. But I think there's a group of 27 legal academics who've just spoken out, and I think it would be good just to pause and pay a bit of attention to the concerns that they're expressing.
Right. Well, I guess Canterbury people might feel a bit legislatively got at, especially with the government removing the Environment Canterbury councillors and replacing them with commissioners, Bruce.
Yes, yeah, well that was a wide-ranging change, and I'm not clear from the distance I watched it that it was necessary or not. I can't judge that. But you've always got to be worried when a government says the elected representatives go out and we'll put in some nice people who'll do the right thing.
The mantra appears to be now, Catriona, that the government says things are working fabulously in Environment Canterbury, whereas previously they couldn't make a decision or there were objections. The principle is still democracy, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, I think it's developing quite a pattern with this government that I do think we have reason to be concerned about. And obviously, as an Aucklander, I've had the super city imposed on me, and you know, there's been lots of valid concerns about the loss of democracy in that process. So it's just not only happening in Canterbury.
So you think we might see more of this in the future, the government taking a rather sort of centralist view about running things?
Well, and I think there's concerns, you know, for example, with the way that Parliament's being run, the number of days that it's been in urgency since this government's been in power. So, yeah, I think overall it's a concerning picture.
Right. Now, I believe you have a bollocking as well.
I do indeed, yes, and mine's to the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, which is reviewing the Code of Welfare for pigs, and which, as it's done throughout its history, seems to be paying an excessive amount of attention to the industry rather than taking a broader view of the picture. And I think we're going to see the new Code of Welfare for Pigs produced by NAWAC next month, and it just seems that it's going to be a continuation of saying, oh yes, we might get eventually to phasing out sow stalls, but it will be too difficult economically to do anything about it. So I think we can expect them to say that it should happen by 2017, which is just a completely unnecessarily long time. And it's hugely damaging to our international reputation. Every time that Sunday, Close Up, all these programs show images of these pigs in horrendous conditions. I mean, these pictures are not just distributed only in New Zealand nowadays, they go all around the world, and we could do something about this well before 2017.
They've had so many wake-up calls, if you like, in terms of, as Catriona says, programs, images, reports about these unsatisfactory practices. And let's not forget, Sue Kedgley was protesting about this years ago, but they seem very reluctant to actually get something done.
Why not go on the front foot? I mean, you know, they know that consumers pay more for, you know, free-range eggs. My supermarket, they started labelling the eggs about 4 or 5 years ago now, and the free-range eggs have gradually taken over the whole shelves. There's only 2 tiny little segments left of battery hens, and all of the consumers buying there are paying more because they want free-range eggs, and pork farmers could do the same with that. I just don't understand why they kept the rearguard action.
So the consumer rules. Well, I have a beauty this week, a sad one. Graham Hunt, he's a prolific Auckland journalist and author. He was to come on this program a couple of weeks back. Sadly, that didn't happen. He passed away last week. Our thoughts go to his family. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks to my guests, lawyer and journalist Catriona MacLennan and Sir Bruce Slane. And thanks to you for watching. Please email your comments to country99tv.co.nz. Check out my blog there, and we'll see you next time.